So I've just finished this book, Lessons in Chemistry by Garmus, and I do not like it. I don't like it at all, but I do have a lot to say about it. First of all, it goes without saying we need more women in STEM because women are talented. But we also need good representation, okay? Not all representation is valid. There is such a thing as bad representation, and I believe this book does a disservice to women in STEM. And I'll explain why. I think if this book had been written by an actual scientist or there was a collaboration with female scientists, it would be easier to get behind because the whole time reading it, it just feels inauthentic. I immediately get the impression, I don't know Bonnie Garmus personally, but it just reads like she is outside of the world that she is talking about. The chemistry, especially, doesn't work for me because I love chemistry and I can just tell that this has not been researched properly and that you don't know what you're talking about. The example that immediately comes to my mind is that the main character, Elizabeth Zott, she has a cooking show where she integrates chemistry into it. Fun idea, sure. But then she's talking to the live audience about the different types of bonding, and she's like, oh, there's three main types. There's ionic, there's covalent, and there's hydrogen bonding. I was like, okay, first of all, that's very misleading. Are we talking about intramolecular bonding? If so, the three main types are covalent, ionic, and metallic. Why aren't you mentioning metallic bonding? If you're going to talk about hydrogen bonding, which is an intermolecular bond, why don't you also talk about other intermolecular forces like London dispersion forces or dipole-dipole? You can say, Alfie, why are you taking this so seriously? The book is called Lessons in Chemistry. I think you are not taking it seriously enough because Bonnie Garmus, I'm sorry, you don't know what you're talking about. And it's apparent. And because you don't know what you're talking about, the character you have created, Elizabeth Zott, she doesn't feel like she knows what she's talking about. And so her entire persona falls flat for me because I can't buy into her being this talented, successful, savant. It's not giving that, okay? It just isn't. This book has just enough science babble so that people who are uninitiated on the subject can be impressed. Whereas people who actually love science, this just feels like a slap in the face. Spoiler alert, when her lover, Calvin, dies tragically and she wants to have oxytocin put on the tombstone, instead of putting the shorthand skeletal formula like any scientist would, she puts the entire displayed formula on the tombstone. What? It's like, no, I can't believe that you're a scientist, Elizabeth Zott, not for one moment. This should be skeletal, it should look like this, I'll put the picture on the screen. No, this is wrong. I can't buy into this delusion. This book also brutally fails the Bechdel test because it's supposed to be about female empowerment, but it is dominated by Elizabeth's relationship with a man. Like, even after he dies, her, thoughts and her grief over him are, the overriding thing. Not that that can't be a part of feminism and that feminists can't love men, but it was at the detriment of actually focusing on her career and, the development of her character, and that just wasn't it for me. Also, can we talk about how, so this is a dog whistle for bad writing. If you have to make every character in your story a terrible person just so that your main character seems likable and we would then want to root for them, bad writing. Don't do it, okay? Because Elizabeth Zott, I didn't like her, but at the same time I felt like I was stuck with her because everybody else in this world felt so terrible and were these real sort of caricature examples of chauvinism that just felt really tired. I just think you can uplift your female main character without presenting every male character as either horribly cruel, horribly incompetent, or both. What really would have made this work for me is if it had been more of a historical fiction and had shown lots of real world statistics of how difficult it was and continues to be for women in STEM. Show us the figures. Like, tell us all of the pioneering women in the 60s, you know, the trailblazers that were making science possible for women now. Like, that would have been so much more immersive and entertaining instead of this weird, it boils down, like, there's the whole science of the novel is completely incidental. It boils down to like a Julia Child style Fanny Craddock, like, oh, she reaches millions of people every afternoon with her cooking show. And like, that's not a bad idea for a book. But what about the science? The science felt like it was left to the wayside, and it's because, in my opinion, this author treats the science like a novelty. She likes the idea of the science, she just doesn't want to actually immerse herself into it. And as someone who actually does like the science, disconnect. As I said, can we get an actual book written by a female scientist, not an author who is looking into this world and isn't really adding anything new or valuable to it? Oh, and can we talk about the dog? We've got to talk about the dog. So Elizabeth has a pet dog called 6:30. I know, right? So quirky. Naming your dog after a time of the day. She's not like the other girls. But anyways, she has a dog. And this dog, we get multiple sections of the book that are in the dog's POV. And the dog is like really cerebral and has like oddly humanoid traits. What book was this? Your entire book is predicated on science. The dog's brain is too small and too primitive to be capable of executive function. We all know that. So why do we have this oddly fantastical, magical dog that is cavorting about and acting like a human? It was so out of place and bizarre. But that's the thing. This book is really inconsistent. Like, Elizabeth keeps referring to her relationship with Calvin and being like, oh, we were soulmates. Soulmates? You're an atheist. You don't believe in the soul. You believe in natural selection and Darwinism. What are you talking about? The book simultaneously derides empty platitudes and people who take things just on faith without evidence, which I agree. But then Elizabeth literally says to one of the people in her live audience, oh, you want to be a heart surgeon? What's the atomic weight of barium chloride? Oh, 208? You can be a heart surgeon. What? What does that have to do with being a heart surgeon? What? It was so bizarre. Wait, can we go back to the dog? So when Elizabeth goes into labour with Madeline, something which the book completely skips over, even though that's a horrible stereotype about how, you know, pregnancy isn't really painful for women. The book could have really gone into how much she suffered through the labour, but anyways, she leaves the dog, she leaves 6:30 on his own for 24 hours with no food. Ma'am, you shouldn't have a dog. That's irresponsible. And this book as well has this weird anti-leash rhetoric where the dog is allowed to freely go about wherever without a leash, and then the one time that it does have a leash is when, like, Calvin trips and hits the pavement. It's so weird. It's a very strange book, what it's trying to tell you. It wasn't all bad. Like, I didn't mind the portrayal of non-traditional families. I thought that was good. And there are some, like, funny and tender moments. Like, it's not a complete wash, but it is definitely in this quagmire of, like, it's just uneven. Like, it doesn't know what it's saying. Despite her intellectualism, Elizabeth is so emotionally stunted that if this book had just had the courage to come out and say, like, oh, she's neurodivergent, that would have made more sense and that would have made the book more interesting. But no, it doesn't. It doesn't do that at all. And so instead, it just feels like a shameless parody of how much these people do struggle in the real world. Like, women in science have it really rough. I took a year out of med school and taught chemistry to sixth formers, and I've seen firsthand, like, how difficult it is and how much they need role models. But this book, it's a no from me.